Hi, folks! On this special community episode of Winners in the Cloud, we have Microsoft MVP Ola from Sweden as a guest, talking about all his experiences with Windows 365 as a service that he has been building and introducing with customers all the way from Europe. So before we start, please make sure to subscribe on our Windows IT Pro channel, our YouTube channel here, via the link below. And if you have any questions right now live for us or for Ola, please make sure to point your questions into the chat below here. So I will make sure that the link is represented in the episode here in the link below. So with that, I'm very excited to introduce our guest, a Microsoft Windows 365 MVP, all the way from Sweden, as I said in the introduction. So Ola, how are you doing?
Hi, Christian. I'm doing fine. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great too, and I'm very pleased to have you. We have been meeting a couple of times face to face already in Redmond, and as well last time during Ignite. And can you tell the audience a little bit, what you're doing in your day job, and as well how you eventually became an MVP?
Of course. I work as a IT infrastructure consultant at a consultancy firm in Sweden. I'm based out of Stockholm, but I live a bit more further up north. I've been doing that for the last 3 years now. My journey to become an MVP actually came from a prior manager of mine who kind of planted a seed in my head that you should go for an MVP title as a long-term goal. I think that was back in 2017 or something like that. And but everything mostly took off when I joined my current employer, where they really encourage you to share your knowledge and blogging and things like that and do community work. And I have a lot of other MVPs working at the same company as I do, and they were encouraging me as well.
That's great to hear, and a great story that you just shared as well. And it reminds me a little bit of being an MVP myself, and that's kind of the same way I started, doing something in your role as an IT engineer, IT systems engineer, and then all of a sudden you start to share what you learned during your day job, and that eventually will make you an MVP. And it's something that is just a passion that you have, and that results in kind of an award. And it's great to see that you are or you have been following the same patterns there. So before we jump into sort of the more kind of conversational, what do you recommend to the audience if they would like to become an MVP as well?
I think what actually got me going was to find what I think is interesting and doing your own thing with it. Of course, take inspiration from everyone else with what they're doing, but just because someone else blogged about something doesn't mean you can't blog about it. That's probably the best advice I've gotten so far. That do your thing because your readers aren't reading all those other blogs that you are reading. So for me, blogging has been a big part of it, and contributing to the community by sharing my knowledge that way. Like you said, what I do in my day-to-day job, I gather that knowledge, play around within my own tenant or my own lab, and then just see what comes out of that and document that in a, for me, easy to read way to not get too technical. At least that's my approach to it. Yeah, and I think persistency in it as well. Becoming MVP is a long-term goal. It takes time, or it's really fast. I had the thoughts for 5 years before it happened, so don't give up. That's probably the best advice I can give.
Thanks for sharing that, and that I think really helps some of the IT Pro audiences that maybe consider doing the same thing. And I think it's very valuable that you share your journey. And it has been great to see as well all the content you created for Windows 365. So keep up doing that great work. And that sort of segues a little bit into the conversation I would like to have with you. And the first thing I would like to ask you, hey, how did you eventually get in touch and excited about Windows 365? Can you share a little bit about that?
I think what got me excited was the simplicity of the whole thing. But what got me into it was I've been looking at the what was previously when it was released was Windows Virtual Desktop, which is now Azure Virtual Desktop, and I was pretty excited for that as well. But I'm not a Azure infrastructure wizard, so I kind of thought, okay, that might get way too technical for me because I have a long background in working with Intune for the last almost 10 years now. And Windows 365 moving into Intune and becoming a part of that management experience really got me excited. Okay, now we can do VDI and cloud computing and in a really simple way for me as an admin that I understand because it's very similar to deploying policies to control your other devices. So I'm coming more towards it from a device management perspective, and this kind of just fits right into the whole picture of where I do my day-to-day job. That it's the same portal. I don't have to head out somewhere else, and yeah, you can predict cost and everything. There's so many benefits with it, which got me excited. But I think the most part was the simplicity of getting started and like starting to build something which you can then evolve to this massive infrastructure, if you like.
So I remember us chatting during Microsoft Ignite like a couple of weeks ago, and you shared as well that story that you like didn't like had the interest of virtualization because it was so complex, and you just shared a couple of stories there, and you got into Windows 365 because you no longer have to deal with that. So can you share a little bit about like that and that journey for you?
Yeah, so for me, Windows 365 was very similar to like managing devices in general. Doing policies the same way, just setting up the basic client is the same thing. You create a policy, you just do some settings for it, and you assign that to a user group and just get it going. And I think for me, what the kicker was that it's very, very similar to how you would manage a device, but now you're deploying Windows or VD or Cloud PCs. On a completely new level, which kind of, yeah, and that opened my eyes towards this segment and finding like my niche within the IT community. Okay, what can we do with this? This is really cool. That was my initial thought around it. And but like I said, being a native part of Intune, not having to jump through different portals, working with Azure infrastructure, or really needing to understand all the layers that comes to VDI was, yeah, really beneficial for me being a device management guy, to be honest.
Yeah, I think I heard that story a couple of times more when I visited like events or talk with customers and especially IT pros, of course, that haven't been like using virtualization, but with Windows 365, they got excited about the technology virtualization with the security benefits and all the simplicity without the investment in spinning up a whole like IT infrastructure kind of department for managing and maintaining that environment. So that really resonates, and I see more and more of those VDI administrators as well moving into like more modern management, as you just shared too. So on two angles, we see different like changes happening in IT departments and shifting like knowledge levels into different directions and more like Intune and device management that is just the same with physical PCs, physical devices, mobile devices, as well as cloud PCs right now. So that's great to hear from you personally as well. And can you share a little bit of the use cases you see in like Europe and in Sweden around Windows 365 that you have been implementing to customers?
Yeah, I've been working primarily with enterprise customers in Sweden, looking at Windows 365 and how that could be beneficial to them, basically. And the most common use cases I see, at least in Sweden, is um, part-time workers and consultants. And because a lot of IT companies and companies in general right now are taking on consultants for different stuff. And those consultants usually have some kind of computer coming in. And given the state of the world and the sometimes hard task of sourcing hardware kind of got the attention for some of my customers to move to more virtualized setup, even for their part-time workers or consultants, just because then they can utilize whatever hardware the person had coming in, but giving them a fully managed client from their environment, which is like, yeah, full worthy member of their IT infrastructure, taking away that need to get an additional computer in your backpack, which as a consultant, you kind of dread that happening because you need to carry even more stuff in your backpack. So that's probably the most common scenario I'm seeing right now, or developers needing a separate computer to do testing on, and that's kind of where DevBox comes into play as well, just to name drop even more stuff.
So we just talked about how you have been experiencing Windows 365 in like the Swedish European market, but I'm very curious right now, like what are your tips and tricks to this IT Pro audience? So I'm pretty sure you prepared some demos and tips and tricks for the audience. So can you show and run through those?
Yeah, absolutely. I've gathered like my top three things right now, which is kind of comes to my head like talking around Windows 365. And what's really been on my mind lately has been doing this in a more region. How can we deploy Windows 365 closer to the end users and having more of a regional setup in a dynamic and automated way? So we don't have to care about manually adding people to, for example, Sweden to get a Swedish experience or uh, Norway to get a Norwegian experience and things like that. So, and working with big enterprise customers, this is something which is important to their organization because they're usually a global company. And I think that this applies to a quite of a broad audience as well, seeing how simple you could set this up. So my first tip that comes to mind is doing Windows 365 deployments in a more regional basis and getting the Cloud PC as close as possible to the end user to giving them more of that local experience for Swedish user, providing them with a Swedish language for Windows and having things pop up in Swedish where you expect it. Because one of the things I've seen working with this is if I deploy virtual cloud PCs to Western Europe, they will pop up in Dutch. So I will get the wrong language for things that my user expect to be in Swedish. So I want to put this as close as possible to them. So what I do is I create a provisioning policy, which I give a name which makes sense to me. There's no right and wrong in naming conventions. It has to make sense to you. But the important part here for me is the Sweden in the naming, so I know that this policy is for Sweden. And I'll do an Azure AD join as a join type and put this on the Microsoft hosted network. Sweden doesn't really have their own Windows 365 region at this point, so we'll use the second best thing, which is Norway's. Because we're pretty close to us, and things will make sense because Swedes usually understand Norwegian anyway. And for image, we'll use the Windows 11 image, but for configuration, which is the interesting thing here, is that we'll select the language and region to be Swedish. So when my users sign in to their machine, they will get the whole Windows experience in Swedish in a language they understand. So you don't have to do the same language for your whole organization. So you can really localize this a bit. And then I assign this to a group which contains all my Swedish users. For this example, I've created a dynamic group which basically looks at location of the user and then puts them all in that group. But you can do this in a different way. But the important part is to figure out how can we deploy stuff to, or how can we gather everyone from the same country in the same group. And a dynamic group looking at their location is a fairly easy way of doing that. And then we'll just review our setup. Like as you can see, I'm using the standard Windows 11 image, so I don't have to maintain my own image, but I'll use the Swedish language pack on top of that to get that Swedish experience and deploy it to all my Swedish users.
So Ola, can I ask you a quick question regarding this? How have you been experiencing the performance of Windows 365 from Sweden connecting to either Norway or another region that is close by to your own country?
It's been working really well, especially connecting towards Norway, since that's the closest one we have. We're still seeing really good performance towards Western Europe as well. So since we're still fairly close to the Western Europe region, it's not really been any issues for us. But as a side note, I tried when I was at Ignite connecting to my Norwegian Cloud PC, and it actually worked much better than I expected it to work.
Yeah, and that was from Seattle, right? Like
Yes,
from Seattle to Sweden.
Yeah, Seattle to Norway to be exact. And that's not really a normal use case, but I thought I had to try it being there to see how it works.
That's amazing and great to hear that. Even though Seattle to Norway is not a normal kind of use case, we are actually working on new improvements on the service that you can move a Cloud PC easily from the same portal experiences to a different region as well. So for the audience here, stay tuned for that. as well to look at our public roadmap page to see the date showing up there once we are ready for revealing that feature to customers. What do you have more in store? What's your tip number 2?
Yeah, my second tip is actually to look into a little bit more into automation. And there's a lot of stuff you can do around Windows 365, which is not really maybe exposed in Intune in all its glory, but you could reach it through the GraphUp API or PowerShell. And this is where I actually will recommend a blog from a fellow MVP called Morten Pederholt, who does a lot of good work around how you could automate and do scripting for Windows 365 and having PowerShell do the work for you. And he has a lot of really good content in there in regards to how you could pull out data which is not yet formatted in a good way in Intune, just to get that extra knowledge to provide to your operations, which is really good. So I would really recommend looking into his blog and finding all those PowerShell scripts and automation that he does. It's really cool.
Okay, yeah, that's great. And I know, of course, Morten pretty well, and his blogs around PowerShell automation are amazing. And I think it's one of his top 3 blogs as well that he wrote so far. So going to the last one in your top 3, what do you recommend more for customers to do?
Yeah, one thing that actually often comes up when talking to customers around Windows 365 is like, how can we look at utilization? And given the fact that many customers react to the price tag of Windows 365, so they want to get the most out of it and make sure that people who has a cloud PC actually uses their cloud PC, so or they can reassign the license to someone else who needs it more. So the second tip is actually a little bit around looking at utilization for the cloud PC, and also maybe arguing a little bit around price point of Windows 365, because there was a report done by the Enterprise Strategy Group a few months back around the benefits of running Windows 365 and the cost efficiency or total cost of ownership, which is really really interesting read to do, because you can really see the benefits on Windows 365 compared to other VDI solution or even physical computers, which is really, really interesting from having that discussion with customers. It gives you a lot of good insights and material to talk around, which is, I find really, really good.
So thanks for sharing that, Ola. So we can put a link to this document in this lower third here below that you can just look up and go, because it's a public-facing documentation, and it really explains indeed the value in terms of making like profit in terms of price wise and other like business orientated processes going to Windows 365 and simplifying your environment in comparison to physical PC, as well as VDI management today, and as well in the last 20 years, all combined in this doc. So really encourage as well the audience to take a look at that. And one other thing to point out here is that if you run on Azure or virtual machine in like a personal single configuration, single session mode, you pay 70 or more percent in terms of price per hour if you run it 24/7 in comparison to Windows 365. So Windows 365 is 75% cheaper than just running a VM 24/7 on Azure. So that's another very good one to point out here too. So we are almost done with this episode. You shared great tips with the audience here. So before we close and share some of the information that people can stay in touch with you, what do you recommend to the audience to take away out of your experiences with Windows 365?
I think the key thing is, like I talked about in the beginning, that the simplicity around this, that it's actually really easy to get started with Cloud PCs and Windows 365, because you don't need that much. Like you said, Christian, you don't need an Azure subscription to get this going. And you need the license in its simplest form, you need a license for Windows 365 and an Azure AD. That's it. You don't need Intune for the business SKU of this. Or if you're a larger enterprise company, you can utilize Intune and really get going there. But you only need a few. You don't need to buy bulk of licenses to start with. Buy a few and try give it a spin and see how this works in your environment. And that's usually the recommendation I give to people I talk about regarding Windows 365 as well. Just get a license, get going, and you will love it. That's basically it.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for being a guest, our first MVP for season 2 on the Windows in the Cloud show. How can people stay in touch with you?
The easiest way to get in touch with me is probably on Twitter, where you can find links to my blog as well, where I post a lot of things. Did a post on the region things I talked about earlier. So my Twitter handle is olaström.com.
Okay, that's great, and I already are a reoccurring follower from all the content and for all the content you create. So keep up the great work there, and thanks everybody for joining this episode. If you want to learn more about Windows 365 and watch other episodes back, go to ak.ms/Windows in the Cloud. And with that, thank you for watching, and we hope to see you at the next episode. Thank you.